Hi, Mary Jo. How you doing?
Hi, Paul. How are you?
I am doing great. Hey, when I'm employed, I'm always happy. So that's a good thing. Um, for those of you who don't know, Mary Jo and I actually worked together in test automation some 10 years ago, was it? Maybe 12.
Yes.
We worked for Redbox, and had a lot of fun over there. A lot of great people, and I'll tell you the one thing about Redbox working at the tower over there that distinctly stuck in my mind was they were building the world's largest vending machine with refrigeration, and it was a oh my gosh, it was as long as a hallway, and you could always go down there and grab a snack out of there. Made all sorts of different boxes and stuff. So that's my memories of Redbox. Um, but let me get back over to you. Enough of my memories. Mary Jo, you're working these days in SpecFlow. Um,
Yes.
Tell me a little bit. What now? When you say SpecFlow, it has something to do with gherkin or cucumber. Explain that to our audience. What is SpecFlow?
So, well, I'll get into that in my talk, but it's
Oh, okay,
basically it's a framework that you can put on top of Selenium to make natural language tests um,
okay. And if I
instead of
remember
code.
correctly, the language you're working is C sharp. Am I correct?
That is correct. Yes.
Yeah. All right. At the very introduction, I said that's if someone asks about SpecFlow, it's usually a hidden question. It's asking what programming language do you work in? Is it C sharp? Is it Java? Um, and if you know Cucumber and stuff like that. I'm going to say, without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you, Mary Jo, and take it away.
All right. Let me. All right. Everyone can see my screen, hopefully. So like Paul said, yes, my name is Mary Jo Zervas. I'm a principal test engineer at a company called Paylocity, which I will get into a little bit what that is. And my talk today is just how we built an automation framework using SpecFlow for UI and API testing. So um, kind of the agenda for today, for the rest of the hour, is I just want to tell you a little bit about our automation story. Um, kind of how we built the frameworks and some of the reasons we picked SpecFlow, some of the common automation problems we encountered, how we solved them, and how we built the framework and a testing community of support here within my company, um, and the success stories we've gotten out of the automation. And we'll just finish up with some questions, and hopefully you can take something away from this, whether you're going to use this framework or not, but hopefully you can take something away from this to apply to your own automation back at your own companies. So I just want to give you a little background about my company that I work for, just to kind of level set who we are and the kind of environment we're doing test automation in. So we're an industry leading cloud-based human capital management software company. We have web UI, APIs, mobile applications to test. There's approximately 500 employees, 800 of us in product development, and we're a fully remote culture. We were remote before the pandemic, and we've just continued that after the pandemic. Um, Approximately 80 or so test engineers across 50 teams within product and tech. So a wide variety of talents, experiences, programming ability, automation experience in the company and in across our test engineers. So I'm dating myself a little bit with a Golden Girls reference, but uh, picture it, Arlington Heights, Illinois, summer of 2024. Um, we had just done an agile transformation, kind of going into an agile uh, software development methodology, and we wanted to uh, include some automation in our testing, and we didn't have a tool. Um, we were investigating tools, and so we came across SpecFlow and Selenium, and uh, thought it was a good fit. And so what were our goals for our automation initiatives? So we wanted to use Selenium for UI. Um, our applications, some of them were, new greenfield applications. Some of them are 20 years old. Our UIs were a little bit inconsistent with complex interactions, so we needed something that was highly customizable to our use cases. We wanted to make sure we had something that could access data and databases for setup, assertions, data cleanup, and we wanted to make something that was reusable with centralized logic for ease of maintenance. At the time when we started on this automation journey, I said a lot of our testing resources didn't have automation experience. So we wanted to adopt a framework that equally folks with less technical skills and less automation experience could still meaningfully contribute to, but also a framework that could grow with us as we got more experience in this area. And for resources that had already done automation, maybe in a different framework or had some programming background, um, th- that they could find this interesting and useful on their teams as well. So, kind of to answer Paul's question from the top, what is SpecFlow? Excuse me. It's an open source .NET tool that integrates with Visual Studio and lets you write Cucumber compatible Gherkin syntax. Um, I like to think of it, it's on top of Selenium. So it essentially is using Selenium. It's just putting this layer on top of it, of this Gherkin syntax to write your test scenarios. It has its own test runner, but you can also use MS Test, NUnit, XUnit, and others. And there is the URL you can go to learn more about it, specflow.org, getting started. Why we chose this? It seemed like a natural fit for us due to the technology, where our applications are written in C#. All of our development resources are very proficient in C#. So let's utilize what we know, right? So we, because it's a C# framework, we're like, all right, this seems like a good fit. We're already using this technology. We already have the tooling. Most of us have Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code. Let's keep on that train and use this. Like I said, we wanted folks who hadn't been exposed to automation that were testing to be able to meaningfully contribute to this. So if they can write test cases in the natural language format, which is essentially just sentences, they can contribute to the automation even though they maybe don't know the ins and outs of Selenium or other more technical skills needed to write automation. It is completely customizable. So, and I don't want to misconstrue SpecFlow. You still have to write and tell the browser what to do. It doesn't have commands that are going to tell the browser exactly what to do. You're still having to write all that. But it just allows you to kind of decouple the scenarios in this natural language format that can represent your test cases and then have code behind that that is actually controlling the browser. And then, we wanted to think about growth. This was almost 10 years ago that we started this, and we're still using this framework today because it was able to grow with us. As we went to more API based applications, we've been able to kind of tweak our keywords that once were UI based, and now we've been able to make them API based. So it was a scenario or a framework that could grow with us as we changed the applications. So just kind of a timeline of our project. So like I said, we started using this summer of 2024. Excuse me, I have a little cold today. We established one team started using this in summer of 2024. And so part of our agile methodology, we demo every 2 weeks, every team. So that team just started to show in our sprint demos, here's this cool automation we wrote, here's this cool framework that we're using. And kind of word of mouth, a grassroots effort got established, and more teams like, hey, what is this SpecFlow thing? How could we use it? Could you help us? And so, soon we had a core group of teams using the framework and helping other teams adopt it. So we kind of, naturally grassroots founded this internal SpecFlow community. And that was this, about 2020, 2016 is when that kind of solidified itself. May of 2027, we reached a milestone. We had cake. It was great. Where we reached 1,000 regression tests in the framework of our largest application. So that was an exciting milestone for us. Then teams started incorporating these tests into their CI/CD pipeline, started using them to sign off for deployments, really reduced the time people had to be on off hours dealing with, having to sign off on deployments. So that was another big win. And then, like I said, as we moved to more API-based development, we started to integrate API keywords into the framework. We built a cross-team dashboard that's outside of Selenium and SpecFlow. Just wanted to point it out that, we did other things in our automation journey besides just using SpecFlow. And, today we got about 20 plus applications and APIs automated using the framework that we built. So it's been a pretty successful past almost 10 years using this. So what is needed for UI automation in SpecFlow? I like to think of it as 4 layers. So you need the feature file. This is what is actually defining your test. This is where you put this gherkin, these natural language keyword test scenarios. Then you've got the actual code of the keywords. So it telling the browser what to do. Open Chrome, log in, hit this button, go to this page. Those are the kind of things you'll see in there. Plus page models, we use the page model object design pattern. So we've got all our pages in our application and their locators. And then it essentially sits on Selenium. So you're using Selenium commands and Selenium is controlling the browser. And then you've got your application that you're testing or your API. So kind of those 4 layers are what goes into a framework that would be using SpecFlow. So just kind of wanted to show an example. So this up here in the top left, this is what a feature file would look like. So you have your scenario, you've got your gherkin, and I'm going to go into this in a little more detail as we progress in this. And then on the right here, this is, so for, I select, text from a dropdown. So I select yes from a dropdown. That's what I put in my test feature. In behind that then is code that says, get the dropdown I have indicated in this page model, because I'm on a page, and select the yes, select this value by text, value yes. So that's the code that is behind that keyword that is going to be executed against the browser. And you've entered text into a text field. So again, enter text. I'm finding the elements on the page, and I'm clearing its input, and then I'm sending keys the text that I entered here, B123, 132. And then I'm doing an assertion. Then the search results are these 4 IDs. And so I'm doing an assertion on that. Again, it's going to the page. It's looking at the table that's got generated on the page, and it's making sure that all the IDs in the table match what I've put here in the test. So this part here in the top left and this here on the right are the 2 pieces that you as an implementer of a SpecFlow framework would be writing. You'd be writing this feature file and these keyword definitions and interactions here. Then this on the bottom right is what is auto-generated by the SpecFlow framework itself. And that is essentially linking these two things together. So let me kind of go to the next slide and show you that a bit more. So here's your feature up here. Here are the keywords that you have written. And when you put in these specific syntaxes that you're binding them, you're given when then, a scope, then SpecFlow takes all that and auto-generates a feature.cs file that kind of ties all that together with its framework. So you can, say, I only want this keyword to be able to be used in this feature and give it a feature name. I only want a specific keyword to be used in a given clause of Gherkin or a when clause. You can define all of that when you write the framework, and then SpecFlow will handle all of that mapping for you. So go into a little bit more detail about a feature file. So first thing is its name. So it's always going to have a feature keyword with a name. So locations, in this example. It's just a unique name to identify the feature. So we use, you kind of map that to, a requirement, essentially. You can call it, but you can call it whatever you want. It's free text. The background. The background clause is for set of commands that would be executed before every scenario in the feature file. So it is good to use for actions that would be common to all test scenarios in your feature file. It's not required, but it's a way kind of to save typing and to keep your files more organized. So if you have a set, right, every UI test, you're going to log in pretty much. So put your login steps in the background, put some common navigation steps in the background, set any variables that you would be using for all the scenarios in the background. Then you only have to type that out once and it'll be executed before every scenario. Then you've got your actual test scenario. So again, it needs a name. That's what goes on this first line. That can be anything, free-form text. So you want to give it something meaningful so you know what it is, because that is what you'll see in your test runner. So you want something easy to identify your test. And then it contains the actions that you want to do in your test. So this particular test, I'm going to go to the company locations ad page and I'm going to save. So I'm not going to, so this is a test that's testing that required field messages show up. So I'm going to go to the ad page. I'm going to save it without entering anything. And I want to make sure that I receive the appropriate validation messages, that the address 1 is required and that the city is required. For those not familiar with Gherkin, I like, for best practices with Gherkin, I like to think of the given as your set of preconditions. So the things that you're going to do before you get to the actual thing you're testing. So, I'm going to this page, I'm entering these fields, whatever preconditions you're doing for your test. The when is your action. I'm clicking the save button. I like to keep the when as specific as possible. So I'm testing the save button here. So that is my when. And then the then are your validations. In this case, I'm making sure I'm validating these 2 error messages are displayed. And you can chain multiple keywords together in a clause. I lost my cursor, there it is, with the and. So give all these, like in the background here, all these lines and, they're part of the given. So they're part of the preconditions. In this case, I have 2 validations because I have 2 error messages I want to check. So then, and then an and, which is also part of the then. Final thing that is in this feature file anyway are some tags. They always start with the @ symbol. And again, these are user defined. So you define these as you see fit. Um, they're a way to group and organize scenarios together. So every um, we kind of do them, like, okay, all our regression tests have this regression medal tag on them. Oh, this is a company test because it's in the company space. Um, we have some uh, specific database thread tags just to kind of control database contention. And then um, we have some feature toggle thing. And those things are kind of specific to my company. So only run this test if this toggle is off, because if it's on, the application does something else. So tags are a way to just kind of organize and flow control your tests based on certain environments or certain uh, feature toggles, or any other categorization that you could come up with. SpecFlow also has a specific one, add ignore, which would skip a test. So if it's kind of like a work in progress or something, then you can use the add ignore tag, and that won't run when you run those tests. Here's another way to write a feature file in a scenario. You can do a scenario outline. And that is for when you have a situation where you have steps that you want to do different inputs for, but it's the same steps over and over. So in this case, like this is a test to check for invalid social security number formats. So, I could think of a lot of invalid social security number formats. Here's just an example of 5. So in this case, I'm going to a specific employee, I want to add dependents, I'm giving it a last name and first name, and then I want to add an invalid social security number, save it, and make sure I get the validation error that it has to be in a valid format. So the way I do that is I write the scenario just like I would any scenario, but I use the scenario outline identifier instead. And then I'm going to have this link between this little token with the caret bracket symbols and these examples, so that those names have to match there. And so every time, this is going to run 5 times, and every time it'll pick the first one, throw it in there, pick this one next, throw it in there, then that one, then that one, and I should get an invalid message on each one. So it's essentially running this scenario 5 times with 5 different inputs and making sure they're all invalid. So without the scenario outline, I would have to write a scenario for each one individually. Again, this saves you time, saves you typing, and it makes your test a little bit more organized. So a page model, probably most of us on the call are familiar with the page model design pattern, but this is just the definition of all of the elements on the page that you want to interact with. So IDs, names, XPaths, CSS selectors, just a couple of ways that you can use to identify the elements. You can also have multiple selectors on an element and prioritize them. So this is good for, if you're changing the UI, but it hasn't been deployed to all environments yet, you can have this multiple selector with the priority, and hopefully tests that run across, multiple environments will still pass because it's looking for either one. And so if it doesn't find it using priority 0, it'll go into priority 1. Hopefully you'll find it that way. Again, just our best practices that we did, we organized our keywords into 3 packages. We had NuGet package for UI keywords, a NuGet package for API keywords, and then a NuGet package for common keywords. This is how we kept things organized. And so for teams that were only doing UI tests, they could just pull in the UI keywords package. So, we had things in there like entering text into fields, how to acknowledge and dismiss dialog boxes, select and validate rows and columns from a grid. Anything that was a UI-based interaction went into our UI keywords. Our API keywords, Similarly, send a request to an API, retrieve and validate responses, check headers, set request bodies. All of those were an API keyword package. Common keywords were things like database interactions, updating tables, selecting from tables, validating. Things got inserted into tables, anything around variables. we organized into that common keywords package. One of our goals was, to kind of keep the front end implementation out of the test. We didn't want in our feature files to have to write things like put this text into this React field or put this text into this Angular field. We didn't care what the front end was written in. React, Angular, some of our older applications are in web forms. So we wanted to we just made a generic keyword called when I set field to value. We didn't even care what type of field it was. Text field, drop down, checkbox, radio button. We didn't want the tester who's creating the test scenarios to have to know that. So we had a generic set keyword that we created, and then it was up to whoever was writing the page model to put specific information about the kind of field it was. So in this case, a web element hint. This is a drop down. It's earnings type is a drop down. So that went into the page model, not the actual test itself. And again, that just helped our less technical resources kind of get used to writing tests and not have to worry about the implementation of the actual application. So yeah, the fields of value. One of our personal biggest challenges was test data management. We are a very heavy data company, being in human capital management and payroll and lots of data. So we created a keyword, again, totally custom to our framework, called a data snapshot. And what it did was you gave it a table and some criteria, and it saved off the current state of that database table. And then you run your test, and at the end, it cleaned up whatever you did. So like if I ran this data snapshot on a say an employees table, so I'm like, because my test was going to add a new employee, and so I'm like, all right, save off the employee table, and ran my test, and then at the end of the test, it would essentially in the background get rid of that, delete that employee that I just added. So right, test data management is just in automation in general is a very critical part of making sure that you're starting with a known data state every time you run the test. So this was our solution to it, this data snapshot keyword that we created. And it would clean up whether the task passed or failed. So we were never leaving like half entered data in the database, that might be screw up tests the next time it ran. So whether you use this kind of concept or a different concept, figure out a way to handle your test data because that's very critical in automation. All right, then some other things that we put in our framework, variables and configuration files. So you can define a variable a couple of ways. You can pull it from, so this syntax we came up with, this would pull this value from a configuration file. So the key is DW testing, and I'm pulling the company value, so 14665. So when this test ran, it would basically replace this token with that value. And this one is just a hard-coded variable, and I set a polling time variable of 5,000. So that's just hard-coded into the test. And then if I use it here, so I'm using this company variable now, we came up with this double percent sign. I'm like, what is that symbol? Percent sign syntax. So that would essentially, again, replace this token with the value that I pulled in from the configuration file. So this way, again, we could use configuration files per environment. Maybe in the first QA environment, there was a company that had a company number 14665. But when I got to our staging QA environment, I don't know, for whatever reason, it didn't have that company. So its configuration file could have a different company value in there for this key. And then we could use the same tests on different environments because it was pulling it from a configuration file. Page loading, again, might be a specific problem to our applications, but because we have, like I said, older applications written in older technology and some newer ones, we had different page kind of wait icons. So wait for the page, wait, loading data. We had these little bubbles. We have this like progress bar. So we had to come up with a way to, again, we didn't want the tester, the person writing the test scenario necessarily to know which of these page loading elements they're going to encounter. So we, again, put that in a configuration file. We just used the CSS selectors of each of these, stuck them in a configuration file, and made sure our pages would wait for any of them. So the person writing the test didn't have to know which particular implementation of the wait class a page was using. Working with grids, another common challenge in automation. You don't ever want to assume that the grid is going to be ordered the same way every time the test runs, right? I've got an alphabetical by last name employee grid here, but if I add another name, then all these are going to shift down. So this con here is not going to be in row 3. Next time I run the test, maybe it'll be in row 4 because some other team added some test data to a shared environment. So we implemented a grid keywords that would essentially search the search the grid based on criteria. Excuse me again. So that was part of the page model definition, that it has this grid. And again, within the page model was the type of grid. This happened to be a Kendo implemented grid. And it's max, you can, again, all specific to some things we were trying to solve. How many pages am I going to search? I'm going to search through 5 pages. If I can't find it in 5 pages, then the test will fail. Am I going to search forward or backwards? We could put all those things on there. And all the person writing the test scenario had to do is say, I want to find this last name from this grid for employee ID. It had to have some key to search on, employee ID 21. So for employee ID 21, I want to make sure the last name is Jones, but I don't care what row that's in. I just want to find it and make sure it's in the grid. So that's how we solved that common automation challenge. Like I said, one of the reasons we picked this framework to use is because we could completely customize it, right? You're building everything in the framework. You're building the test. You're building the code behind the test. So while most of our keywords are common interactions you would have with the browser, I click this button, I enter this in this field, I navigate to this page, I make sure this field has this value. Teams got really creative. We could build keywords that did multiple steps in data setup within a single keyword. So like an example, I calculate the sum of the year-to-date data for year-to-date 2021 for this company and this employee and this code group, and I assign it to that variable. So that's under the covers, right, is going to do a ton of stuff. But again, the point, or the thing we were trying to solve is the person writing the test case knows that you have to set up all of that information, right? Like to test whatever scenario this is testing, I need to have an employee in a company in this particular code group with this year-to-date data. But maybe they don't know how to do that because they're new to the company or they don't know what tables that are in. We endeavored to try to make the automation framework so robust that it had a keyword that's like, here, this is going to set this up for you. Just tell me what company and employee ID and what year you want it in, and we will set that up. So all they have to do is drop this keyword into a test, and all that gets done for them behind the scenes. Another thing that SpecFlow gives you is hooks. So you can they have specific bindings and specific keywords that will be before and after scenarios or before and after features that you can execute code in. So, and again, that solves, that allows you not to have to put those specific steps as part of the test. It's just kind of an automatic hook that happens after the test. So an example of this would be a deleting the employee after you run an add employee test. Again, you want to clean that up. You don't want that employee sitting out there run to run. So you just put those commands in a after hook to delete the employee that you just added. And it'll automatically be run whether the test passed or failed, cleans up your data, and it doesn't have to be part of the test definition itself. Oh, I have a video. All right, hold on. Let me see if I can get this to work. Hopefully this is coming through. Okay, so on the left here is our actual automation code. On the right here is our application. So I'm just kind of going to talk you through as this is going. So it's logged in, and now it is navigating to a particular company. So it's ran this login step. Now it's doing this navigation into a company. I am going to a new employee add page, and I'm unchecking this checkbox. I'm adding first name, last name. I'm giving it a random social security number. I'm selecting these drop downs that are required to anything because I don't care what they are. And I'm saving. It's a little waiting. And now I'm checking that the new employee record message is up there. Receive the info summary message, new employee record. And you see, I have no code in the test anymore, but it's still doing stuff. That's one of those hooks that I was saying. So you don't have to put the hook in your code, but I'm cleaning up the employee I just added now in an after hook. But there's no actual code in the test itself for that. Okay, I think that was it. So a little about API testing. Really, it's the same concept. You're still using scenarios, feature files, keywords. We just defined more API specific keywords. So again, I'm using variables, which I used in the UI tests. And now I just have some keywords that are specific to APIs, like I get this resource. So here's my API endpoint. And when I send that get request, I'm expecting a 200 back. This is just a log message. I write the response to the console. And in this particular one, I'm verifying that the response is the same content as the SQL query. Like I said, my company is very data heavy. So we found a tool like Postman, for example, not to knock Postman. I love Postman for manual testing. But it can't validate against a database. So for automated tests, we really wanted to be able to validate our responses from APIs against what's actually in the database. And so SpecFlow allowed us to do that. And, it was just a common or a natural extension of what we'd already built for the UI. We were able to reuse some of the keywords we'd already built, and then we just built additional API-specific keywords for authentication tokens, building request bodies, sending the requests, validating the response, the statuses, other headers. And because everything was in the same framework, it allowed us to combine, hybrid tests of UI and API actions into one test. So I know we could do like maybe some data setup in the UI, then run the API or use the API to clean something up that we did in the UI. So opened up a lot of possibilities because everything was in the same framework. Kind of to talk about our community that we have internal to our company. So, we encourage contribution to this framework. The framework is owned by kind of a tools team that, also kind of manages our load test framework and some other test frameworks, but anybody can contribute to it if they have an idea. We established a committers group that reviews PRs that consists of some software engineers, some QA engineers. And so, we just, that group is really just reviewing PRs to make sure that things are adhering to our coding standards, that, it wouldn't break anything for anybody. And that's worked out really well for us. Our tests have tests. So, right, automation is just a programming initiative, an effort. So you should test your tests. So we have unit tests in our framework to make sure that if changes are made, we haven't broken any of the keywords. And like I said, we have defined and documented coding standards that we try to adhere to for this. We have a framework starter package that kind of helps teams spin up a new automation project. So it has examples in there of some simple interactions and actions you can do in a UI or an API to help teams get started. And we have a large wiki space for documentation, getting started guide, troubleshooting articles, keyword libraries with all examples of how to use them, video libraries of some of our community of practice meetups. We have Slack channels. I think that's on the next screen. We've dedicated Slack channels where anyone can ask questions. We have bi-weekly community of practice automation meetups. So lots goes into maintaining this because, right, it is a development effort, automation. Some success stories that we have had. So most teams are running these tests minimum daily. Some run after every deployment, some run after every build. So that continuous feedback has been really important and really has helped the quality of our applications to get that fast feedback from automation, which is one of the goals. Previously, before we kind of had automation in place, we had to wait until it got to a QA environment, then someone had to manually test it, and that could be, what if the deployment failed and then you lost a whole day? So this has really improved our fast feedback. We're catching bugs earlier in the development process because of that feedback. Daily automation runs for our largest project probably has caught over 150 defects in QA, and maybe we wouldn't have caught all those manually because it's a large that's a large application that we have. So having daily automation regression run for that project has been a godsend in helping us find things early in the development process and saving us time. And, one of the goals of automation is to free up your manual resources to do more exploratory testing. My philosophy, automation isn't the be-all end-all of quality. It is one tool in your tool belt of quality. But automation is, right, you're programming what your test is doing. It's going to do no more or no less than what you've told it to do. So if you've got all that in there with, your basic happy path and negative scenarios, then your actual human resources can spend more time doing, well, what if I did this button in this order and then went to this screen and closed the browser? All these weird edge case scenarios that are hard to automate, or wacky things you think your end users might do, or just anything else you can think of to break the system, right? And that's, I think, really one of the benefits of automation is you're automating all the easy stuff, the easily repeatable boring stuff and you're letting your human resources do the more fun, what if I do this type of testing, crazy stuff? And it let us got more sleep, as I like to say in this slide. Um, we we deploy a lot, and prior to automation, we did validation and production. You know, things deployed, and a bunch of people would get online and make sure everything was still working. Um, and because of the nature of our business, most of our deployments are off hours. And so with automation, we can just have the tests validate what we're doing, and all of us can go to sleep. Clearly, if a test failed or something, someone gets paged, and we'd have to go figure out uh, what was wrong with that during a deployment. But it has greatly improved our deployment resource need to have less of us online after hours. So wrapping up here, I think SpecFlow is a great tool if you desire to implement a keyword framework in C#. It worked out very well for us because it allowed our resources who were kind of a little bit scared of automation to meaningfully contribute, because they started out writing those feature files, which is essentially a test case in English or whatever, in natural language. And that's what they're good at, right? Manual testers are really good at coming up with test scenarios. So they're writing the test scenarios and they're easily understood. I could give the test scenario to our product owner and say, this is what I'm planning to test. What do you think I'm missing? And they're not slogging through code. They're just reading a document. Treat automation like a development project, because it is one. It's code. So use the same standards that you're using for your actual application development in your automation development. And cultivate a thriving community to share tips and tricks. I think that is one of the reasons why we were so successful at this, is because we are just very collaborative and shared between teams and shared the cool things that we were doing. And I know a lot of, you can find a lot of these communities outside a company too. So utilize the resources of the internet to find those as well. So I think that is it, Paul. I will take some questions. Here's some of my contact info. I'm old school, not on Twitter or anything, but you can find me on LinkedIn.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mary Jo. So
Danny, my camera's over here.
yes,
In the camera.
I had that issue too, and today I've got 3 computers over here, so I never know which one I'm looking at. So so we really didn't have a whole lot of questions on there, except for some guy named Paul Grossman who had a question right there.
Yeah. So it will only execute the. I can't remember if I'll be honest, I can't remember if this is configurable or not in the framework. I know the way we have it set up is it will, if it fails the first validation, the first, then it will stop the test and will not do the other ones.
Okay.
That might be configurable, and I apologize for not remembering. I can look that up and get back to you.
I think it is. I think it would be configurable on that. That's one of the major things I look for in all different frameworks is, if I'm doing 10 validations and the first one fails, I want to know what the other ones are.
Right.
I don't want to just, okay, I fixed the first one now. What about the other? Oh, I had 3 other ones that are in there. I liked a lot of the stuff that you brought up. One thing that you mentioned is, it's an automation is a development project, and we should be following the same processes that we have in there. One thing that I always try and compare is the developers to the STETs, and do the developers have administrative access on their systems?
They do.
And if they have it, I always go like, my STETs get it too. It's not, that's one of the most important things I do out there. Is there anything that you look at that you could expand on, like to make sure that you're really seen as a development project?
So like kind of we actually had to fight that battle at my company about the admin access for assets versus developers, and we did fight that, and we won because yes, we're like we need the same tooling, we need the same exact tooling and permissions because we are automation developers, and so we did make that case and won that. Um, you know, and we implemented a lot of the same controls on our automation repository that the developers had. When you do a commit, you got to have a Jira card in the commit message to check in. Um, we've got a couple, like I said, unit tests. We made sure we're implementing unit tests in the framework, and those are required on the PR. So, we did take a lot from our developer friends and what they're doing with the actual application and their development process and brought that into the automation framework process, um, and how we handle that. And so, yeah, I think that's an excellent, it's an excellent point. It's it's the same skill set, just like two different, what am I trying to say? Just views of it.
Yeah.
They're building applications that clients are using. We're still building an application. Our users just happen to be internal and other testers.
I also noticed that on one of your slides, you said you got to a one milestone, which was 1,000 test cases getting executed. Can you tell us a little bit about like how do you deal with the more test cases we get, the longer it takes to complete all those test cases? What do you do to make sure that we can get results in the shortest amount of time?
Yep. So you can do threading in SpecFlow. So we run the tests on, I think it's like 4 or 5 threads. So they do run in parallel. Um, one of the things, and in one of my slides was that little database tag, and that's how we did, as we upped the threads, we noticed contention in the database as tests were trying to access like the same tables or something. So we did kind of artificially group them by like, okay, if you're doing an employee test, because we all know that's always going to be in these set of tables, we want to do that like on a dedicated employee test thread. And if you're doing a company test, you want to do that in a dedicated company test thread. So we kind of artificially uh, controlled our threads that way. But you could, um, yeah, you can just have just like, give me 5 threads. Here's the set of tests. I want to run them against 5 threads, and SpecFlow will just distribute them for you, however you want. If you don't need that kind of granular control that we realized that we needed.
Cool. I
And again, it's
liked.
just
Yeah.
Selenium, right?
Okay.
Sorry to interrupt, Paul.
No, no, it's
This
fine.
is just Selenium under the hood. So a lot of the other Selenium tools um, that are out there, Selenium Grid, and even what Anand showed about Applet tools that you can plug into Selenium, you could use all that within this framework. You could build it in. We haven't yet on some of that, but it really just is Selenium under the hood.
Yeah. Uh, I noticed something that I had not seen in the years I've been working, which was you had multiple locators for a particular element,
Yep.
level one, level zero, level one, stuff like that. Um, can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Well, the problem that we're trying to solve with that is our deployment pipeline is a set of several environments before it hits production. And not, we're working on doing that faster, not going to lie. But sometimes there could be a week delay between QA environment 1 and QA environment staging,
Okay.
for example. And so if you have um, you're running tests in both environments and maybe the new UI hasn't made it to that second environment yet, so you don't want the test to fail just because it can't find something because it's running an older version. So that's why we implemented the priority locator
Okay.
thing.
I like that because that is the first time I've seen that implemented that way. Um, I usually put in some sort of smart code in there. It says like if you didn't find it this way, try it this way. Never thought about trying to set it up as two different locators to go find an element. So
Yep.
really smart on your guys' side. Oh, I wanted to get back to that 1,000 test case. Yeah, we talked about getting it to run in multi threads. Do you divide your test cases up into GUI and API? And do you like is there anything is there a smoke test that
Yep.
starts out with a percentage of stuff? Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So again, we just use those tags. So our goal was to have, one repository of tests that could be used for multiple purposes, and that's why we use the tags. So yeah, you can out of those 1,000 tests, maybe 20 of them are tagged with smoke, and when we, in our CI/CD tool, we happen to use TeamCity. Um, so when we are running our smoke tests in there, we just like say, just run the smoke test. So it's still pulling from the same repository of tests, but now it's only running the ones tagged smoke. Or, it's only running the API ones. We'll put API tags on something. So we use the tagging for that. So we don't have multiple, we don't have a repository that has smoke tests and then a repository over here that has regression tests. No, everything's in one repository and the tagging controls what tests are run.
I also like the fact that you pointed out early in the presentation about the token replacement, where you had I think it was the 2% signs,
Yep.
identifying uh, of an element of that is getting replaced. Usually, I do that with it's just a date, and then you can increase the date or backdate it and have it replaced on that. What other examples did you use for the token replacement?
Yeah, dates is a great one. We have that. We'll have there's a keyword in our framework like give me today's date. I don't remember the exact syntax, but it'll be today or yesterday or the day before, or give me a variable today plus 10 days. So we use dates a lot in token replacement, um, which is a great example. Uh, but yeah, anything like I said, in the presentation, because our different QA environments have different data on them. We do a lot with config files and token replacement that way. So we'll pull a value from a config file that's specific to that environment and then use that value in the rest of the tests where we've identified the tokens. Just because our QA environments are just slightly different with the data.
Hmm.
And again, reusability, we want to use the same tests in every environment and not have to make environment specific tests.
Yep. I also noticed that you did touch on like the first thing that I've always been a little weary with gherkin and cucumber is the way the data is handled and putting it actually in the test and having it run out of that. And you did mention about you set up I think a connection that you can go and just pull the data directly from the data from a database source.
Mhm.
Um, that is that like one of the first things you had to address as a challenge is um,
That was in the top. Yeah, it's the nature of our application and the way our test environments are is sometimes it's easier to go look for the data you need instead of to create the data you need. Um, so we did put that in fairly early, just keywords like I want an employee that is paid hourly, or I want an employee that, is from Wisconsin, something specific to a payroll scenario that, we need a certain setup of employee for. And uh, you could do that all in a test, right? You could set up all of your test data within a test. And for small things, I think that is probably the proper way to do it because you want your test to not be so dependent on, you want your test to use the data it's creating, I think ideally. But sometimes that's not practical. If I had to set up some of these more complex scenarios every time the test run, that would triple the runtime of a test sometimes. So looking for the data, just go to the database, find me an employee in Wisconsin, and I'm going to use that in my test.
yeah,
And so yeah,
just
that was kind of early on in the framework development, we realized that was a need.
yeah, and we just came across one of our first items, which is cleanup. We're creating these tabs, and we're like, okay, now we got about 30 or 40 of these tabs. We gotta go add the cleanup in there. Cleanup's like it's almost something that it's almost as an afterthought on most projects, but Mary Jo, you've hit every single item out there. I think everyone who's been listening here is, um, you really open up all the challenges. Automation, as I like to say, is easier said than done, because you don't know what these extra things are. You've covered a lot of those topics. You obviously are uh, a pro in your field. Um, I appreciate everything that you've done here on this presentation. It's been very insightful. Any final words before we wrap this up?
No, I thanks for having me. Like I said, hopefully people took away something, even if they're not using this particular framework, something that was useful for automation in general, because I think the concepts of automation are universal. Frameworks might differ, but concepts are universal.
Absolutely. Cool. Mary Jo, thank you so much. I appreciate your time. We have to catch up one of these days. We're almost in the same neighborhood, so
Yeah,
we should go, have some fun or do something, at Pinstripes or something
sounds
like that. I
good.
don't know. Haven't been there in a while. All right. I'm going to say thanks to Mary Jo again.